Good evening, and welcome to the Got Ancient Wisdom live stream. Trevorn in the chat asking, when does it begin? It begins now, my friend. Sorry, it's I have a bit of setting up to sort of do every week when I get in, so it's always a bit tight between, getting into the studio and then setting everything up. So sometimes it can run a little bit late, which is why I leave the intro thing running, just so that I can get everything ready. Who we got so far? Trevorn, N.A. Theory, and The Only Way Out is In. Hello, everybody. So we're going to just continue with this part 4. So it's chapter 10, and it's part 4 of the book, but it's chapter 10, Old and New Men, the Recent Evolution of the Nervous System. And I'm just thinking if I can... Well, I'll probably just read back a bit from the last page where I stopped. Everyone all right anyway? Yeah? Okay, so this chapter it's the biggest chapter, I think, and we're talking about D 2017. Hello, nice to have you in on the live stream. So this chapter is about the differences with Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, and it's delving into the idea of the hybrid, of humans being a hybrid of the two. So there remains a further and crucial aspect of classic Neanderthal's life to be considered. Hopefully the reader has himself detected the frequent and, to me, remorseless parallelism that exists between the features of the suggested clash between Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal and various aspects of the myth and legend, both religious and secular, of Europe and the Near East. One final piece of evidence appears to tip the scales definitely in favour of the position that there are several coincidences, too many for the parallels noted to be the result of chance. A well-known feature of the Neanderthaloid and Paleoanthropic skull has deliberately been left undiscussed till this point. Its significance has long escaped the present author, but in the course of rereading Romer's Man and the Vertebrates, to which I am therefore indebted, its probable meaning became clearer. Romer's own words are, "In Neanderthal man, the eye sockets are very large and round. Amongst what kind of creatures does one find large, round eyes? The answer, of course, is among nocturnal creatures." The reader is invited to inspect the skulls reproduced in figures 22 and 23. Let me just see if I've got those in here. There you go. Get that up. These are the front and side views of various Paleoanthropic skulls and the front and side view of one Neanthropic, actually Cro-Magnon skull. Do not the eye sockets of the former impress us as the eyes of a nocturnal or semi-nocturnal animal? The sockets of Cro-Magnon, one notes, are longer than they are higher and characteristically downward slanted. It is from the side views of the skull that one best appreciates how much larger and apparently more bulging were the eyes of the Paleoanthropoids. One says apparently, for of course we have no actual idea of the appearance of the physical software of any ancient man. The possibility that Neanderthal was nocturnal in his lifestyle enables us to understand a great deal of what is otherwise puzzling or simply meaningless, such as, a small example, the association of large-eyed creatures of nocturnal habits, cats and owls, with witches. Again and again, throughout our exploration of System B, the trail pointed puzzlingly to a nocturnal setting. Although, as will be shown, nightlife reaches perhaps its most marked expression with classic Neanderthal. its influence is nevertheless detectable amongst the Paleoanthropics as a whole. One can, of course, in general, only speculate as to what factors might have led or forced classic Neanderthal to adopt a marked nocturnal existence. A possibility is the avoidance of predators abroad by day, another is snow blindness. Present-day Eskimos wear a piece of bone with a fine slit in it over their eyes. Without such protection, permanent blindness rapidly ensues. Certainly, however, the arrival on the scene of Cro-Magnon would have reinforced any tendency to avoid being seen by day, and perhaps also led to a retreat to the deeper caves. One recalls that in legends, dwarves and similar figures work underground and inside mountains. That Neanderthal's nocturnalism, however, preceded the arrival of Cro-Magnon can be seen from a fact that is wholly obvious once one has begun to think of Neanderthal's life in those terms. Classic Neanderthal had curved arms and thigh bones, enlarged ends to the main bones, and many other skeletal irregularities. He has in general a somewhat stooped posture. The first Neanderthal skeletons discovered were initially thought to be those of modern humans suffering from illness or deformity. An illness widespread in industrial slums in the first part of this century and earlier was rickets. It is perhaps not generally appreciated that this disease produces curved arm bones as well as leg bones in addition to other effects. It is a deficiency disease caused by lack of vitamin D, the amount of free vitamin D available in nature being extremely limited. The majority of animals, including human beings, synthesize this vitamin in the skin under the influence of ultraviolet light, hence its name, the sunshine vitamin. Lack of the vitamin in childhood produces various types and degrees of curvature and deformity, including large joints. The precise effects, however, depending on the amount of calcium and phosphorus also available. The slum children of our own industrial era were receiving insufficient sunlight, while the deficiency is rarely experienced in the tropics. If the deficiency occurs or persists in adult life, the spine may become deformed. One recalls at this point that the troll and the dwarf are frequently called hunchback, as is Punch. Once again, it seems it can be asserted that no detail of legend is unimportant or included without cause. If classic Neanderthal rested in the caves by day and hunted and socialised principally by night, rickets would be endemic in the whole population. Slightly curved limbs are found among some Neanderthaloids, arguing that a tendency to nocturnalism existed among Paleoanthropics generally. Perhaps we have also solved the puzzle of the straight limbs but Neanderthal head of Rhodesian man, who lived in the tropics and could therefore hardly have avoided the small amounts of sunshine necessary for normal growth. Good point. Hang on, sorry, I've only just caught the chat, sorry. What's up with social media all crashing? I'm off it all. Right, okay, Z207, okay. Oh, this vid said it's an error. Oh, it's back again now. Okay, right, fine. Right, okay. Ralph Hexham in the room. Hi, Ralph Hexham. One further point can be made in connection with nocturnalism, but before making it, in case it is felt that we have been making much of nothing in this discussion of sunshine deprivation, let us consider momentarily the phenomenon of blonde hair and fair skin. If a demographic map of Europe is made showing the incidence of fair skin and a further map showing the incidence of overcast days in the year, the two maps agree rather well. It is clear then that fair skin, the ability to make best use of limited amounts of sunshine, has proved a decisive survival factor along classical Darwinian lines. Any tendency towards a lighter skin has been selectively reinforced. Reverting to classic Neanderthal, what was the form of his religion? We can only speculate about this, but we have noted in earlier chapters a tendency for older religions to be linked with earth-moon goddesses and later religions to sun-light gods. It is likely then that Neanderthal was a moon and not a sun worshipper. And would not such behaviour be in any case more natural and logical for a nocturnal people? Can one go further and say that any people worshipping the moon are likely to have been nocturnal in their habit and lifestyles? Were, once again, all Paleoanthropics night rather than day oriented? One proposes that since their inception, whenever and whyever that occurred, the demographic maps of Europe and a further map showing the incidence of overcast days in the year. That's something I haven't seen actually, but maybe that was well known. Maybe that was well known in the olden days when this was written, that you could overlay a demographic map of Europe showing fair skin and fair hair, and the overcast days in the year. There'd probably be a good map to bring back. I think there'd probably be 2 good maps to bring back. I mean, that's actually quite a it's quite a sort of damning piece of evidence, really, isn't it? That where it's overcast. I mean, it goes into more detail in that in Personality and Evolution, because it is sort of Personality and Evolution. The second book is more about Cro-Magnon, and a sort of deep dive into where Cro-Magnon came from and what drives Cro-Magnon. Right. One proposes that since their inception, whenever and whyever that occurred, paleoanthropic and neanthropic man have found darkness and light respectively more congenial. This statement implies some kind of conscious choice or intention. This can be avoided by suggesting simply that paleoanthropic man is the evolutionary product of a somehow nocturnal environment, whilst neanthropic man was subjected to the evolutionary pressure of daylight conditions, with all that these 2 sets of circumstances imply. In thinking along such lines, one may as well get one's priorities straight. It is natural for us, when considering darkness, the nature of the unconsciousness and the nature of the unconscious and so on, to imagine neanthropic man banishing his more sinister relatives to the gloom, to the edges and margins of the real world. This is probably a serious misconception. Paleoanthropic man was probably, after all, first on the scene by some millions of years. Is it not far more likely that he drove neanthropic man into the daylight? This is perhaps yet one of the further meanings of the story of the banishment of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, or of Cain from his homeland, and the forces behind all stories and legends of banishing. To generalise at this point, it is the conviction of this book that in the 2 broad groupings of paleoanthropic and neanthropic man, we have respectively a System B dominant and a System A dominant variant of Homo sapiens. In the former case, nature appears to have capitalised on what we may term the old nervous system. In the latter case, on the new nervous system. This claim is somewhat borne out in the next section, where we examine, as best we may, the actual brain structures of the 2 variants. In the grossest possible terms, the differences may be perceived in the contrast in development in the 2 cases of the rear of the skull and the front of the skull, respectively. For reasons which are by no means entirely clear, System B seems to function optimally under conditions of reduced light or actual darkness, while the exact converse is true of System A. Representatives of the 2 major variants of Homo sapiens did not, however, altogether succeed in evolving into 2 wholly separate species, the possible exception to this statement being Cro-Magnon as compared with classical Neanderthal, by reason one has suggested of fairly continuous crossbreeding either of a forced or of a more amicable nature. One can perhaps imagine such a crossbreeding taking place at the periphery of contact, perhaps between peoples of not too dissimilar appearance, who then, as it were, fed back the acquired genes to their more distinctly paleoanthropic or neanthropic relatives. Such might be the symbolic significance in such expressions as the Twilight Zone and No Man's Land. I have proposed that these suggested crosses between varieties of man at least occasionally resulted in hybrid vigour and the emergence of new qualities or personality characteristics. This, one argues, has resulted in the continuous stepwise development of man from the ranks of the primates. One has also proposed that the cross between Cro-Magnon and the Neanderthaloids of the Near East produced an exceptionally vigorous hybrid, namely ourselves, and resulted directly in the rapid, major advances which thenceforth led to the emergence of modern civilization. Cro-Magnon peoples arrived in Western Europe initially anatomically free of mixed characteristics. Even today, readily recognizable descendants of this physical type exist in peripheral areas such as Scandinavia and the Canary Islands. In subsequent millennia, however, repeated waves of migrants of mixed characteristics fanned out from the Near East across Western Europe. Thus, in time, modified Neanderthaloid characteristics were incorporated into the European gene pool. A.S. Romer notes, "To this dash of Neanderthal blood, some suggest is due the rugged build of the upper Paleolithic people of Europe and the occasional primitive features noted in their skulls. Our attention centres on the fact that all major advances towards our present civilised state, as far, of course, as the admittedly piecemeal nature of the finds allow us to conclude, are associated with mixed populations and not, in particular, with the Cro-Magnon variety in its purer form. This seems to hold true whether we consider variously the emergence of art and art forms, the establishment of the first permanent towns, the practices of farming and animal husbandry, the commencement of the Bronze Age, the development of handwriting, or the rise of latter-day religion. Looking back briefly at 35,000 BP, we find at that time Cro-Magnon and classic Neanderthal in existence as pure varieties, each possessing in their different ways a brain, as far as we can judge, equal if not superior to our own. Yet what had either actually achieved? Neanderthal, we believe, had evolved some kind of religious belief, perhaps a form of natural magic. At any rate, he buried his dead in ritual fashion. Aside from this, all Neanderthal leaves behind him are a few unexciting, poorly executed tools. No buildings, no art, nothing of this kind. The Cro-Magnon legacy, that is, of the first 15,000 or so years of his occupation of Europe, is even poorer. We suspect that he was a first-class fighter. The skeletal build alone argues this, and in this connection we have noted one or two suggestive scraps of legend. He may have been barbarically cruel in a rather offhand, psychopathic way, his pleasures and interests centering chiefly in the hunt, the combat and the kill. Apart from this, Cro-Magnon would appear to have had few noteworthy features. It is important not to romanticize either Cro-Magnon's or Neanderthal's way of life. By our standards, they scraped little more than a bare existence from their environments, by whose charity they continue to exist. In this, they cannot be said to have achieved significantly more than any other species of animal in existence at that time. One is saying, in short, that their control over environment and events was, in general, extremely slight. It is, indeed, very tempting to argue that it was the physical genetic crossing of these two varieties which enabled the enormous potential of each to be realised. Whether or not this is true, what is certainly true and beyond all argument is that between the years 30,000 and 20,000, a number of dramatic changes in the sapient way of life occur. The site of the earliest known art find is perhaps significantly in Eastern Europe at Brno in Czechoslovakia and dated 27,000 BP. The find itself is the sculpture of a man of mixed characteristics, the brow rather low but straight, the eyes deep sunk. The owner of the sculpture is, to us, even more interesting. The man who owned this sculpture was of a rather primitive physical type, robust with unusually heavy brow ridges, very slightly hollowed between the eyes. It seems possible that some of his ancestors belonged to the less specialised Neanderthal-like race known to have lived in the eastern part of Europe. That's from N.K. Sanders, Prehistoric Art in Europe. Art finds in the west of Europe occur much later, from the early 20,000s on. Is it that man there had to wait longer for his booster injection of Neanderthal genes? The exquisite flake tools of this area, for which Cro-Magnon is rightly famous, appear even later, from around 19,000 BP onwards. One or two points are worth making in connection with the cave paintings of the era, which are also attributed to Cro-Magnon. These are found in southern France and northern Spain. Two brief extracts from the specialist literature follow. Prehistoric painting was born in most instances and always in the great classic sanctuaries in the entrails of the earth where it found its meaning. Paleolithic painting consists primarily of rich and recurrent ensembles in the darkness of caves. Prehistoric painting of the Upper Paleolithic cannot be separated from a long experience of the subterranean world, which is from P.M. Grand, Prehistoric Art. The fine engravings, like the paintings to which they are often joined, usually lie far away from the places where men lived. The question of situation belongs to a different order of problem from the purely mechanical. It is an aspect of prehistoric art which immediately and powerfully impresses everyone who has visited the caves, especially the tortuous labyrinths like Tukdudubert. That's from N.K. Sanders again. What we've got it's a quick question come up. The only way out is in. Do you think that Neanderthals' stuff and remains might be buried totally under the cities, or may have been burned to nothingness? Yeah, I think because we've only ever looked at deserts. Obviously, they're really easy to dig in a desert, so that's why they find most stuff in deserts. But I'm sure that there's probably stuff buried under cities. Cities are obviously strategic places. That's why most cities are been cities for so long. Is that somewhere like London or Paris or Rome, these capital cities have been habitable places for years because they're in strategic areas like in the bend of the river or on a hill. Usually you've got the idea that a city is founded on 7 hills like Rome or Paris or even London. And so each of those hills is going to have stuff in it from the previous people, that lived there before. But that said, Cro-Magnon was different to Neanderthal in the way that they perceived the world, as we can see from the System A and System B types, is that System B isn't really about structure and legacy as such, whereas System A is very much about leaving a mark on the land. So what's possible is that all of the stone monuments and statues and all that are the remains of the hybrids. So we've got things like the Sphinx, which is a hybrid itself, and Stonehenge, and all these stone circles and stuff are all the work of the hybrid. So before that, they didn't really leave much behind. I don't think Cro-Magnon as well really built much stuff. I don't think there's any Cro-Magnon cities anywhere. Although there might be one on an island somewhere, far up, on an island under the sea that's buried. We never know. Ralph Hexham, my city is 2,000 years old. We dig up all sorts. Yeah, that's true. I mean, when they do actually dig something up in a city, they do actually find, like, no one knew that Boudicca, whatever you want to call her, was actually a person until they, started finding the layer of ash under London and St Albans or whatever it was, and then it sort of started making sense. I think they found a Roman diary or something, or whatever it was, the Caesar diaries. I think it was written in biro, and it said something about a crazy lady who came along and burnt the 3 cities down in rage. She was raging against the empire, she was raging against the machine, and she burnt down all their cities. Yeah, so when you do start digging, you find all sorts of stuff, and it's just purely that we've got like cities on top of cities is the reason why they don't build, but why they don't dig. Sorry, but I'm sure they would find loads of stuff under most cities. You probably find Cro-Magnon stuff right at the very bottom. But yeah, I think that that Neanderthals buried themselves, but I don't think they necessarily buried cities or even built them. They probably destroyed them straight after they'd used them as ritual centers or something. The only way out is in. Cities are spiritual centers, ley line crossovers, etc., and planetary thingies, microcosmic referencing. Yeah, that is also something that we're going to come across in a later book. And we can, and there is actually a there's somebody from the 1800s who Gooch pulls up his work and shows that the ley line stuff was also to do with towns called Alais in France, and that essentially Alais and ley are a reference to Elysia, or the Elysium fields, fields of the dead, and there's some sort of Neanderthal pilgrimage sites all over Europe that were called Alais, and that's where the word ley also comes from ley lines. Yeah, so they, well, I mean, we'll get into that a lot later on, but it brings up spiders, spider webs, labyrinths. The word labyrinth doesn't have any etymological start point in Europe. It's a word that's come into European language from no one knows where, and Gooch proposes that it was probably a Neanderthal word. Right, back to, right, okay. So we've done the prehistoric paintings, fine engravings. These cave paintings found deep underground, sometimes as much as a mile from the cave entrance, in places usually difficult to approach and in areas far from where man actually dwelt. There is thus something to recommend the suggestion that it was classic Neanderthal who introduced Cro-Magnon to the caves, that it was here that the remnants of that race were perhaps finally trapped and slaughtered. One has, of course, no classic Neanderthal himself conducted religious ceremonies in these deep caves, and that Cro-Magnon adopted the practice thereafter. In general, however, the specialist literature does not contest a link between these paintings and rites of sympathetic magic connected with hunting, the movement of game, and so on. There would seem, whatever else, little doubt that the mystery rites and the labyrinths of ancient Greece and the Near East are somehow descended from these ceremonies in the deep caves, a suggestion also made by N.K. Sandars. When these sacred places were no longer visited, the images of the caves may not have died, but have remained, no less obsessive for being no longer understood. As well as the physical barrier, there arose also a spiritual barrier, and the real journey to the cave sanctuary became the journey to Hades, the land of no return, the descent of mystery religions, and the underworld journey of shamanic ecstasy. Here then we have at least one practice which would appear to have survived fairly definitely for some tens of thousands of years. One should perhaps also recall that the cave paintings and associated ceremonies in question were still being performed in those deep caves, at the very least already some 10,000 years after classic Neanderthal had vanished forever from the area. It is salutary too to remember that modern Western civilization has so far lasted a mere 2,000 years. An extremely interesting feature of the paintings mentioned previously is that the majority appear from internal evidence to have been executed by left-handed artists. This apparent fact, along with other considerations, has led some authorities to propose that left-handedness predominated amongst the peoples of those time. This may or may not be going too far. There would seem at least to be grounds for believing it to have predominated amongst cave artist priests, if such there were, and possibly amongst the makers of tools too. The view of the present book, nonetheless, is that classic Neanderthal and the Neanderthaloids were predominantly left-handed, while Cro-Magnon was predominantly right-handed. If such were the case, left-handedness could come to be associated with witchcraft. Perhaps in later generations, left-handedness was one of the features associated with the general Neanderthal inheritance. Perhaps actual witches were more often left-handed than not. And I'm just going to read a note here because this is quite a good note at the end of that sentence. There is a great deal more one could mention on the subject of left-handedness, but this would unfortunately take us too far, such as the fact that the tribe of Benjamin, which means the tribe of the son of the right hand, had a famed battalion of left-handed slingsmen. Every one a picked man who could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Apart from the left-right paradox itself here, there is the matter of the number of left-handed slingers, which is stated as 700. The total combined forces of the tribe of Benjamin is given as 27,400. Thus, the slingers represent around 2.5% of all armed men. This is not in itself exceptional, but the question is, of how many left-handed men were these to pick? We have no way of estimating that number. A further reference to the tribe, moreover, 1 Chronicles 12, 1-2, tells us that they were among the mighty men who helped him in war. They were bowmen also who could shoot arrows and sling stones with either the right or the left hand. They were Benjamites, Saul's kinsmen. Benjamin is the youngest son of Jacob. Does that mean the most recent in evolutionary terms or neanthropic? J. Hastings, in his Dictionary of the Bible, comments, the character of the country of the tribe of Benjamin was fitted to breed a race of hardy warriors rather than a peaceful agriculturalists. In Genesis XLIX 27, Benjamin is described as a ravenous wolf in the morning, devouring the prey, and even dividing the spoils. These are characteristics which the present argument would certainly associate with a tribe described as being of the right hand, that is, of System A. One does not wish to make too many disconnected comments on these issues. They deserve a book to themselves. But it is perhaps possible that the tribe of Benjamin was a group having a somewhat stronger admixture of Cro-Magnon blood in an area of basically Neanderthaloid peoples. An important feature of the emergence of art from our present point of view is the suddenness of its appearance, full-fledged and unrehearsed. For coincidentally or otherwise, this is one feature of the outcome of a hybrid cross, the new characteristic. Be it longer fur, greater size, ill-temperedness, as with mules, is present, and as present as it is going to be, allowing for differences within the normal range of variability of the characteristic in the very first hybrid offspring produced. In respect of this aspect of art, P.M. Grand writes, we know that art has no infancy, that it either exists or it does not. N.K. Sanders tells us, art flashes up, mature, perfect and puzzling. What we first find is neither crude nor tentative, but an ivory figure, a female torso and a woman's head, which are, I think, works of art by any standard. Thus, art does not improve from its beginnings, though it is, of course, ever new. In this general evaluation of art as a hybrid capacity, and not as a learned function in the normal sense of that term, one notes that it is impossible to teach any other primate, even chimpanzees, to produce any recognizable representation of anything. They lack as a species all capacity for pictorial or plastic reproduction. As pointed out earlier, the major steps towards what we term civilization seem invariably to be associated with mixed populations and not with the earlier or purer Cro-Magnon strains of the West and Northwest Europe. Thus, farming and agricultural communities appear in the Near East around 11,000 BP. The first town of which we have any knowledge is that of Jericho, 9,000 BP. The discovery of metal is made in Mesopotamia, and there the Bronze Age begins. Modern religion, as practiced today in the West, also originates here, the Jewish calendar taking its beginning over 5,700 years BP. In this general area arises too the first great civilization, that of Egypt, and writing is invented, so one could go on. What, meanwhile, was happening in Europe during these millennia? Of course, something was going on, but it probably consisted principally of hunting, exploring and killing. What can certainly be said is that nothing of permanence comes down to us apart from the cave paintings and the excellent flint tools. No monuments, no buildings, no townships. Why then does one assume exploring and fighting? Mainly, perhaps because these figures so largely in the Germanic and Nordic sagas which do come down to us. These, of course, at least in the form of which we have them, are very recent products, perhaps only a few thousand years old. Still, the Vikings, that warlike and inquisitive people, seem to be at least anatomically the descendants of Cro-Magnon, and they exhibit precisely the qualities we are discussing. Throughout the long period in question, one pictures, or on an ever-increasing scale, the rise and fall of empires, trials of strength, both personal and national, the pendulum of alliance and treachery. Yeah, that's what we're in now. Ralph Hexham, XLIX 49, not 27. No, it says... what it says is in Genesis XLIX 27. So I think that's like 49:27. I think that's what he's saying. But he puts all of the first parts in bloody Latin. But thanks for pointing that out anyway. My brain weren't clever enough to do the sums on the Latin. I was never very good at that clock. When we had that clock at home, I had to make I made my mum just get a clock with normal English numbers on it. So this, throughout the long period in question, one pictures on an ever-increasing scale the rise and fall of empires, trials of strength, both personal and national, the pendulum of alliance and treachery. While these goings-on may sound extremely romantic, especially when contemplated from an armchair, one should not hesitate to point out that these were in all likelihood errors and areas of extreme barbarity with very few redeeming features, and that this kind of behaviour does not constitute civilization. These people lived and died by the sword, or more accurately by the flint axe. The result is the same. The European barbarians, the Cro-Magnonoids, were gradually civilized from the east over a period of many millennia. At this point, we discontinue these sociological speculations in order to resume those of physiology, still, certainly very much in the hope of demonstrating the hybridization of varieties which, amongst other things we have been discussing. It will by now be clear that this book considers that in paleoanthropic man we see nature in the process of producing a system B dominant sapient, and in neanthropic man a system A dominant sapient. As stated, this gives the situation a flavour of intention. We can avoid any such idea by stating, neutrally, that a particular kind of life, such as the nomadic, once undertaken, and for whatever reason, could tend to favour thenceforth the survival of individuals who were, or what, aggressive, tall, good at handling environments, and the unexpected. Another kind of life, perhaps one involving a permanent home base, might favour the quality of living with as opposed to dominating or raping an environment. If the site were to be really permanent, one would have to be ready neither to overhunt nor overcrop. Qualities then of unobtrusiveness or patience might be required, and possibly a tendency to move about a half light or by darkness. Given that two such broad ways of life became established, for whatever initial reasons, perhaps equally favourable to survival in their different ways, interaction between tribes of these opposite persuasions could well reinforce these tendencies. Night tribes might deliberately stay out of the way of day tribes, probably at all times, while day tribes might take care to attack their cousins only by day. Benjamin, a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and even dividing the spoil, never by night. The favouring, then, of what are recognisably System B attributes leads to the paleoanthropic form of Homo sapiens, the favouring of System A qualities to the neanthropic sapiens. In general terms, this suggestion accords well with the findings of earlier chapters. It is further borne out, as we shall see, by an inspection of the brain structures of these two forms of man. Before undertaking that examination, a final comment. A fear of the writer is that, having read this section, his reader will say, he has made out a case based on a reasonably impressive amount of parallelism for the view that the ancient myths and legends of Europe are at least partially a distorted and fantasized account of a historical event, the overrunning of Europe by Cro-Magnon. How interesting. Excellent. Well, that's that then. Another stronghold of the fantastic has succumbed to patient scientific investigation. The author feels that if he hears this, he will go out and shoot himself. For while that statement is, as he believes, true, it is the least important facet of the material we have examined. Those historical events were the starting points of the legends. They are not what gives those legends their vitality and longevity, are, above all, not their explanation. There are two strands here which we shall try to unravel without letting matters become too complicated. Classic Neanderthal is enshrined in our legends, not so much because he was once a formidable real-life enemy, although there is a contribution from that direction, but because he is or was an embodiment of our unconscious fears. He is our own other secret self made flesh, no longer content merely to haunt our more uneasy dreams, but suddenly physically there before our waking eyes. Symbolically, as has been indicated in detail elsewhere, the dwarf, the troll, and his companions represent the cerebellum, our own night personality, the shadow self, the unwelcome lodger that lives within each of us, relatively passive or relatively active, as the case may be. Classic Neanderthal involves us in our own System B precisely because he is the embodiment of many of its actual qualities. Let us consider one example only of the pointlessness of trying to argue that classic Neanderthal was a historical event and nothing more. In Persia, a mere 3,000 years ago, there flourished a mystery religion, the cult of Mithra. It was an extremely vigorous cult, clearly with a wholly current appeal for its spread rapidly through the Roman army. This event was taking place some 30,000 or more years after Cro-Magnon moved up into Western Europe and dispatched classic Neanderthal, a considerable time gap. But what is still more to the point is that classic Neanderthal was never in Persia or anywhere near it. It is perhaps just possible that one or two bands of stragglers wandered down this way after the alleged sack of Europe. But certainly the original inhabitants of Persia could never have fought for their lives against any Neanderthal peril. Yet the cult of Mithra enthusiastically slaughters a bull in an underground crypt or cave for millennium after millennium. What must then be the origin of this situation, and whence did it derive its then and there psychic energy? Must it not be that the stories of battles against classic Neanderthal gradually filtered back east where they were immediately understood symbolically? A further point, it is perhaps possible in some sense to account for Nordic legend solely and simply on the reality basis of a probable protracted struggle against Neanderthal. Many details of these legends fit with observed and hypothesized, though probable, attributes of Neanderthal. But look now at those other legends of the Near East, e.g. those of the tall, warlike sons of the gods, which we have suggested refer to Cro-Magnon as perceived by Neanderthaloid peoples. What of angels? What of man ascending to heaven in fiery chariots? Did Cro-Magnon or anybody else really possess those attributes? Or is one ready to dismiss these particular facets of the legends as nonsense while retaining the more reasonable ones and agreeing that there could well be slightly distorted or colourful references to Cro-Magnon? One could do this if one wishes, but one then risks the charge of special pleading. Why is one allowed to reject some aspects of the legends and not others, and on what precise grounds? By proposing the concept of the archistructure, the present book is able to accept all aspects of these legends. The concept and many examples of archistructures, though not by this name, have already been discussed in these pages. An archistructure can now be defined as a felt or perceived function of or structural feature of the nervous system, projected or unconsciously acted out in the lifestyle of the beliefs, customs, and social structures of the individuals concerned or of whole communities. The moon and sun, as they appear in legend, are therefore archistructures, as are those religions and philosophies which describe the universe in terms of opposing forces of good and evil. The political divisions of left and right, too, are essentially archistructural in origin. The symbol of the Christian cross is yet a further specific example. The term archistructure is deliberately chosen to align it with the Jungian concept of the archetype. A clear difference of emphasis will be seen to exist between the two concepts, though one would hesitate to say that the distinction is absolute. An archetype is defined here as the psychological concomitant or accompaniment of a biological response, or a group of related responses, which a species, in this case man, has acquired in the course of its evolution in reaction to a quite specific situation or crisis. This response in some way selectively favours survival, is, therefore, thenceforth biologically fixed or bred into the variety or species in question. One can now see that classic Neanderthal, the dwarf, the witch, and all these associated figures are both archistructural and archetypal in form. These are the two strands mentioned earlier. The survival response, which Cro-Magnon made in the face of Neanderthal, which, one suggests, therefore became biologically fixed, has produced our archetypal experience of such figures. The archistructural response to those events was already present in the makeup of Cro-Magnon, as indeed of all sapients. The archetypal response is involved in, amongst other things, the real-life witch hunts in the objective everyday world. It is the archistructural aspects, however, which are concerned in and give strength and meaning to the symbolic bull ritual or bull worship, to the mysteries, to the Christian devil, and to religion in general. Now, although the troll, the witch, and so on are at once both archetypes and archistructures, this does not hold true for the demigod, the shining warrior, and the angel. These figures are only archistructural. They are not archetypal. We have no wish and little evidence to argue for any variety-specific fixing of that response. When man experiences the earth, he somehow experiences something of his own nature and origin. When he sees the moon, he sees his cerebellum. When he sees the sun, he sees his own cerebral cortex. One is anxious to avoid the word projection here. Rather, it is that certain features of the environment suggest back to us certain features of ourselves, of our nervous system. What might have happened, one wonders, if the Earth had had 2 moons and 2 suns. Thus, not only luminosity of a fairly marked variety, but some such further aspects as movement upwards somehow echo symbolically aspects of our own self-experience, that is, of our experience of our own nervous system. One recalls that messages from the senses and somatically induced sensation, as well as messages relayed from the cerebellum or the subcortical centres, travel upwards to reach waking awareness in the cerebral cortex. The sun, too, apart from having both the attributes of strong luminosity and movement upwards, also conveniently goes down in the evening when waking consciousness, at least in system A dominance, is reduced. More to the point, is that any object or phenomenon which has any one of the attributes of the cortex or of waking consciousness will tend also to be held to possess other System A qualities, even if it does not actually do so. Thus, when the Near Eastern Neanderthaloids, System B, saw Cro-Magnon, they actually saw, for example, 1. Someone taller than themselves, i.e. above them, and 2. Someone with a high, clear forehead, unlike their own recessive and perhaps hairy foreheads. And 3, someone with at least some body areas free of hair, say the upper arms, whose skin perhaps shone in the sunlight. And 4, someone extremely strong, ruthless, and masculine. They did not see someone who soared up in the air. They did not actually see flames playing around someone's head, or any of the other features which eventually come to be ascribed to angels and other similar mythical figures. These are fantasies, or more precisely, archistructural accretions added perhaps long after the actual events which initially triggered the myths in question. Angels soar into the sky largely because the sun does. That fact, in turn, has significance, or has prior significance, because, I suggest, some function of the nervous system is therewith echoed. This rather telescoped account of these features of our general theoretical argument is expanded in Chapter 12. Right, so that's 25 past. Oh, it's good you're all having a little chat. Nice. Right, so this is part 2 of this chapter. In making statements about the brain structure and the related behaviour or personality of early man, a number of points need to be kept firmly in mind. First, that in many respects, the brains of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal were essentially similar. These two varieties of man, although at the time of their suggested meeting having apparently made tentative steps along different evolutionary paths, nonetheless shared very recent common ancestry in evolutionary terms. This aside, experimental observation has in any case shown A, that functions performed by a higher centre can, in the absence of that centre, in many cases, be taken over by a lower centre, without necessarily dramatic loss of fineness or response, or, more importantly here, simply by an adjacent cortical area. And B, that localization of function, especially in the cortex, is in any event something of a myth except in very general terms, so that speech, for example, appears to be, in modern man at least, a combined parietal, temporal, occipital operation, with the assistance of yet another area in the frontal lobes. And finally C, that despite recent advances, very little is in fact known of the functions of many parts of the cortex. One must be clear, therefore, that although, for example, the frontal lobes of Neanderthal's cerebral cortex were, to judge from the receding forehead, less well developed than those of Cro-Magnon, there is no question of Neanderthal not having those areas, only of their being less well represented. And that even were they wholly absent, which is not true, one still could not even then say with certainty that the functions they subserve in Cro-Magnon were therefore absent in Neanderthal. With this battery of provisos, it may be felt that there is little point in proceeding with the inquiry. However, something can nevertheless still usefully be said. Some areas of the cortex have been shown by electrical stimulation and other techniques to have definite motor or definite sensory functions, that is, concerned with particular movements and sensations respectively. The remaining and intensive areas of cortex which do not have these functions are termed association areas, implying that they have associative or interpretive properties in respect of already stored or incoming information. The frontal lobes of the brain, already mentioned, are generally concerned with volitional motor movements. The forward part of the lobes, termed the prefrontal area, has, however, no motor function. It is possible that it was in this particular region that Neanderthal was most deficient. Experimental data, including that obtained from psychotic patients who have undergone prefrontal leucotomy, shows that destruction of the prefrontal areas produces varying, and that word very much means what it says, degrees of dulling of general awareness, reduced socialization, loss of creativity, and an overall primitivation of behavior. Responses to the operation, as stated, vary considerably, depending on which part and what amount of these areas is put out of action. In monkeys, this operation leads to loss of the ability to solve at least some types of complex problem, those which necessitate holding one aspect of a problem in mind while attending to another aspect, as in serial tasks, or which depend on a delayed response. From such experimental evidence, psychologists have concluded that the prefrontal areas contribute to the experience of events over time, to the complex patterning of behavior, and to orderly thinking, and seem linked with conscious learning and conscious thought processes. While, as already emphasised, there is no question of any of these functions being totally absent, either in classic Neanderthal or the Neanderthaloids, it may nevertheless be that these functions were less highly developed in these varieties of man. When the skull of classic Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon are viewed from the front, it is seen that, apart from the generally lower vault, the Neanderthal skull is widest just above the ears at the temporal region, and that the Cro-Magnon is widest above this point, in the neighbourhood of the parietal lobes. This argues that the former was better endowed in terms of temporal cortex relative to parietal cortex, while in the latter the position was reversed. The temporal lobes contain the primary auditory projection areas and the auditory association areas. They appear also to house the individual's memory store. Penfield and others have shown that electrical stimulation of parts of the temporal cortex evokes vivid, complete memories from the subject's past. Dogs with the temporal lobes excised ceased permanently to respond to their names. These lobes additionally contain an important speech area, speech recognition. Finally, they seem of great importance in the facilitation and control of emotion, including sexual behavior and aggression. The parietal lobes are the seat of stereognosis, the sense of tactual recognition of shape. They appear also to be the main projection area for the body's senses, touch, the awareness of the position of the body and limbs in space, and these last in relation to each other from within the body. The kinesthetic memory is found here, the memory of learned movements. For the foregoing reasons, the parietal lobes are held to be directly involved in manipulation and in skilled movements of the hands, mouth and eyes. Manipulation, in a general sense, is a property of the whole cortex. Lastly, in conjunction with the temporal and occipital lobes, the parietal cortex is considered to be involved with language and some higher thought processes. Viewed from the side, Neanderthal's skull is characteristically elongated at the rear. Thus, the occipital lobes of Neanderthal were probably larger than those of Cro-Magnon. It may also be that the cerebellum of Neanderthal was larger, possibly even much larger. The occipital lobes house the primary visual and projection areas and the visual association areas. It will be recalled that it is from the surface of the occipital cortex that the alpha rhythms are emitted when the eyes are closed or in daydreaming. This part of the cortex is also concerned with reflex movements of the eyes. On the basis of what has gone before, it seems tentatively possible to conclude that Neanderthal would not have been ideally equipped to handle the technical and technological problems in which our society has become so specialist. Equally, it seems possible to conclude that Cro-Magnon was so equipped. This is not to imply, however, that Neanderthal did not enjoy a rich mental or emotional life, using the term emotional in its widest possible sense. Such behavioural evidence as we have would also support this view, since Neanderthal had evolved a religion. In terms of brain structure, too, there are grounds for supposing that he possessed an excellent, though perhaps non-practical imagination, and a memory for events possibly in excess of our own. This last, coupled with the possibility of strongly developed powers of vision and hearing, may have provided an indispensable survival kit in the environment in which the paleoanthropic was typically at home. That is, in darkness. Is it perhaps permissible also to suggest that Neanderthal was fundamentally inward turning, preoccupied with the self, as we have defined it, and valuing his inner life, while Cro-Magnon was outward turning, the manifestation of ego in terms of his conquests and journeying, that while Neanderthal built no cities of stone, he perhaps built cities of dreams. So I think we'll leave it there. That sort of come right back round. It's like The Only Way Out is In. It's like you knew what we was going to end on, so you had a premonition. So we'll get into premonitions a lot later in the paranormal. You haven't heard anything yet. You think you understand where Gooch is coming from, but then you realise that the implications of being... I've got a really itchy nose tonight, and I'm a bit snotty as well, a bit bunged up, but not bunged up in a bad way. I'm like bunged up in a sort of getting ready for winter way. Yeah, you think you've got like the grasp of what Gooch's theory is about, but then when he goes into the implications of what our Neanderthal inheritance really is, it starts getting really interesting. Really interesting when you start getting into the what possibly those cities of dreams could imply, because that was written in 1972, and then his book in the 1980s was called Cities of Dreams. So there's a continuity between all of his work that's that's just, it's like he was really only doing one idea the whole time. But it's such a big idea. It's such a sort of, a revolutionary idea that, yeah, you can see why he only really focused on one idea. He did write non-fiction work as well, and done a couple of other bits like that. Poetry. Oh. I've got some of his poetry somewhere from the 60s when he was a beat poet. Because Gooch really, he found a lot of sort of kinship with the beat writers of the 50s, people like Kerouac. He was a massive Kerouac fan. So Ralph Hexham is asking, what do you think of the white stag being shot incident? Stags and deers always in cave paintings and prehistoric culture. Yeah, I did see something about that actually at the time when that happened, and people were saying that it's something to do with a bad omen or something like that, but an indicator that the other world is near. But that's in Celtic mythology, isn't it? It's some Celtic myth. But I think also, well, that would be good if the other world was near, I suppose, yeah. But isn't it also a royal sign? I'm just looking it up now. Officer gutted to shoot stag dead in Bootle. I don't understand why they had to do it. I really don't still don't understand why it was so important to just shoot it and not just sort of like herd it up somewhere or something. Also, what was it doing in Liverpool? Had someone stolen it? It's the badge of Richard II. Yeah, that's it. So I know it's one of the. I think it's one of the royal beasts. White stag, royal beast. It's called the White Hart, isn't it? White Hart. Yeah, because there's loads of pubs called the White Hart, and I presume they're all royal. Yeah, I think it is Richard II. Probably derived it from the arms of his mother, Joan, the fair maid of Kent, heiress of Edmund of Woodstock. It may also have been a pun on his name, as in Reichardt. Oh, okay, that's a good one. The White Hart, the Reichardt. Yeah. The only way out is in. Why would they chase it for 9 hours and not be able to shoot a basic injection? I know, yeah, it's so weird. What other world, though? Yeah, I know. You got to ask the Celts. You got to go and find a. I mean, even the word, even that description, Celtic mythology. So Celts, all the way from Ireland all the way to Bulgaria. So which Celts? Did they all believe exactly the same thing? Celts more of a culture than anything. It's not a group of people. There's no way you could. That would be like saying Europeans, and just you're talking about all Europeans like black pudding and fried eggs for breakfast. Europeans love black pudding for breakfast. Their dumb 5G control grid world is coming, or our golden era of enlightenment as their nonsense crumbles. Depends what side you're on, I suppose, doesn't it? Trevorn Wright, did Stan Gooch have children, and why did the ancient value animals like cats in Egypt? No, Stan Gooch didn't have any children. He was married early on in his life, but he got divorced and became a writer. The writer's life, and you can't really, if you're going to be a serious outsider, you can't even have someone to share your life with because you're an outsider. Why did the ancients value animals like cats in Egypt? Yeah, probably something to do with cats and dogs are sort of seen as like these two companion animals to humans. So they can be sort of shown to possess qualities of system A and system B. Like dogs are known as man's best friend, and we only really talk about cat ladies, so we don't talk about cat men. And you rarely see homeless women with a pack of dogs, but you see homeless men with a pack of dogs, and you see cat ladies with a pack of cats. So they sort of, even the ancients were only working on these archistructures that we've just talked about. Ralph Hexham, we are Stan Gooch's children. That's right. Yeah, he planted more important seeds than ones that would go on to betray you later in your life just for a few pieces of silver. He's created a legacy, yeah, that can't be corrupted, because the truth can stand up to flames or whatever, So the only way out is in. Lol, I meant all that about the omen of the white stag. What world is coming? Yeah, I know. I know what you meant. Yeah. What world is coming, and how are we to know? Out of those two mentioned, seems like. Yeah, I know what you meant. Yeah, and when I said it depends what side you're looking at it from, I meant it depends if you're one of the elites. Depends if you're an elite, or it depends if you're a Celt. Like, how do you view like the other worlds coming? What other world? The for the Celts, I'm sure it's like the other world would be like, the world of fairies and all the rest of it. But for the elites, the other world is probably, it's probably the same place to them, but to them that's like somewhere they like. Or maybe shooting the white stag is. They're going to replace the white stag with a robotic robotic white stag instead, and then you'll just be able to buy robotic. No, that just all sounds like a sci-fi film. It seems like misinfo to wind us up. Yeah, I think so. Maybe it's like shots fired on pagans that they're just trying to wind pagans up. So pagans, if you're a pagan out there, just hold your ground. Don't get wound up by them. They're trying to get under your skin. They're trying to get under your animal skin that you're wearing as your totem animal. Okay, so just hold it down. Don't get pissed off by these people. They're doing it on purpose to wind you up. If you're a royalist, they're doing it because they don't like Richard II, and they don't like the royal family. So they're trying to. That's like a little subtle call out to the Plantagenets. Any of the Plantagenets out there, could be some sort of holy blood, holy grail type thing that they're going after the Plantagenets. I don't know. It could just be that they don't have the resources anymore to be able to give a fuck. So anytime anything happens, they just deal with it in the same way. So they're like, oh yeah, put it down. What was the other one? Oh, the seal. Yeah, there was that seal. It reminded me of that time there was the seal in London. In London, there was a seal that was swimming up the Thames, and people were going to see it. I think it was in Wandsworth or somewhere like that, and they were going over to see it. And a woman's dog attacked the seal. It was like a seal that was sunning itself on the side of the Thames, and the little dog ran over to it and attacked it and bit its flipper, and so they put it down. And they the way they reported it in the news is they said, yeah, we had to put it down. And then when you saw the injury before they put it down, it didn't look like a sort of injury you put something down for. And they said there's nowhere to put it where it could heal, and we wouldn't be able to release it back into the sea. And you don't have to release it into the sea. Somebody would look after that animal for the rest of its life. There'd be a sanctuary somewhere that you could take it to. But I think they just couldn't be bothered. That's what it boiled down to for me. From reading the story, they couldn't be bothered to do any of this stuff. So they just put it down. And I think it's the same with the white stag. It shows the contempt that sort of neoliberal late stage capitalism, whatever you want to call it, the contempt that they have for nature and anything that people hold to be, quote unquote sacred. And that's what you should take from it, really. It's not about the symbolism of it. It is about the symbolism of it, because it's about the symbolism of what it represents, really, to them. So, that's probably my last word on it. Okay, anyway, it's 10 to 10. It's getting late. We should all be going to bed, getting some good sleep, spending some time with your System B. So, I'm going to say good evening, everybody. Have a good sleep and all that, and I'll see you next week. So thanks, everybody. Good night. Oh, hang on, we've got a few more comments in. Yeah, I remember the seal. Same kind of brutality and shock, emo hijack tactics. Yeah, that's right. The only way out is in. Their contempt of nature and anything beautiful. And then Ralph Hexham, yeah, I remember that story. The dog owner was a rich London vet who got hushed up to protect her mutt. Yeah, okay, yeah. But anyway, the dog was only trying to protect. Let's look at it from the dog's perspective. The dog had never seen a seal before, and dogs are they're protectors, and so that dog was just trying to protect his owner, and it's not the dog's fault that the dog was like, what the fuck is that? I'm going to go and attack it. Because you don't see a lot of seals, but that's one thing, you don't see seals. Anyway, that's controversial ending to the show. Okay, good night, everyone, and thanks. See you next week. Let me get the outro. Bang.